Florida sells itself on theme parks, beach resorts, and retirement communities. But tucked between the overdeveloped coastlines and the interstate corridors, there are towns so small they don't show up on highway signs, and yet millions of people find their way there every year. Some of them don't even fully understand why. 10. Seaside. Most towns grow organically. Seaside was designed on graph paper in 1981 by a developer named Robert Davis, who inherited 80 acres of Florida Panhandle Beach and decided to build something that looked like the American small town of 1950. Front porches mandatory, garage doors facing the alley, picket fences required by the Homeowners Association. Architects called it new urbanism. Film studios called it perfect. The 1998 Jim Carrey film The Truman Show used Seaside as its primary set because the town already looked like a constructed reality. That detail alone drives a specific kind of tourist who wants to stand inside a real place that was also a movie about the impossibility of real places. Seaside has roughly 300 permanent residents. On a summer weekend, it absorbs thousands of visitors who come to eat at the food trucks on the beach, walk the color-coded streets, and feel something they find difficult to articulate afterward. The town's own residents have watched that phenomenon with a mixture of pride and quiet unease for 30 years, and counting. 9. Everglades City. There is one road into Everglades City, and it is the same road out. The town sits at the southwestern tip of Florida, where the land stops making up its mind and simply dissolves into mangrove and water, and the 400 people who live there have made a particular peace with that geography. For most of the 20th century, Everglades City was the staging ground for Everglades National Park expeditions, the last supply stop before the wilderness began. What nobody planned for was the town becoming a destination in itself. The fishing is extraordinary. Stone crab season brings serious anglers from across the country. The kayaking routes through the 10,000 islands are among the most celebrated paddling trails in North America, and the isolation that once made Everglades City feel like the edge of the inhabited world is now precisely the thing that people drive 4 hours from Miami to experience. Hurricane Irma hit the town directly in 2017, flooded nearly every structure, and the community rebuilt anyway. The road ends here on purpose, and the people here intend to keep it that way. 8. Cedar Key. Cedar Key sits on a small island off Florida's Gulf Coast connected to the mainland by a single causeway, and the 700 people who live there have spent decades resisting the kind of development that swallowed every comparable Florida coastal community. No chain restaurants, no high-rise condos, no spring break infrastructure. What Cedar Key has instead is a working waterfront, where clam farmers bring in their harvest, a collection of 19th century buildings that survived because nobody had the money to replace them, and a particular atmosphere that painters and writers discovered in the 1970s and told everyone about against their better judgment. Winslow Homer painted here. The town now draws artists, birders, and people who specifically want a Florida beach experience that Florida mostly stopped offering 40 years ago. The wait list for waterfront restaurant tables on weekends runs hours long. The town has no interest in expanding to meet the demand, and the people who live there will tell you that directly if you ask them about it. 7. Apalachicola. Apalachicola produces roughly 90% of Florida's oysters, a fact that would make it remarkable in any context. What makes it genuinely unusual is that the oystering economy coexists with one of the best preserved collections of 19th century commercial architecture in the American South. The town grew wealthy on cotton shipping in the 1830s and 1840s, and the merchants who profited built substantial homes and storefronts that nobody knocked down when the money moved elsewhere. The cotton trade collapsed after the Civil War. The town pivoted to fishing and timber. The buildings stayed. Today, Apalachicola has around 2,500 residents and absorbs visitors who come for the oyster bars on Water Street, the independent bookstores in the old commercial buildings, and the specific quality of light on the Apalachicola River in the late afternoon. It has the bones of a significant city and the population of a village, and that combination turns out to be exactly what a certain kind of traveler has been looking for. The oyster population in the bay has declined sharply in recent years due to upstream water disputes, and the town is navigating what that means for everything built around it. 6. Cassadaga. In 1875, a spiritualist from New York named George Colby claimed that his spirit guide, a Seneca chief named Seneca, led him through the Florida wilderness to a specific patch of land in Volusia County and told him to build a community there. He did. Cassadaga became a registered spiritualist community in 1894, and it has operated as one ever since. The 100 or so permanent residents are practicing mediums, healers, and spiritualists who conduct readings, hold seances, and offer services that the town's handful of shops and the historic Cassadaga Hotel exist to support. What draws the tourists, and they come by the tens of thousands annually, is not simple curiosity about the supernatural. It's the particular atmosphere of a place where the operating premise of daily life is that death is not a conclusion. The oak trees are old, the streets are quiet. The sign at the edge of town calls it the psychic capital of the world, and nobody inside has ever disputed that. First-time visitors sometimes arrive skeptical and leave having made an appointment to come back. 5. Tarpon Springs. In the early 1900s, a Greek sponge diver named John Kokoris arrived in Tarpon Springs, recognized that the Gulf floor beneath the town was covered in natural sponges, and went back to Greece to recruit the experienced divers who could harvest them. What followed was one of the most complete cultural transplantations in Florida history. Greek families arrived in large numbers, Greek Orthodox churches went up, Greek bakeries, Greek restaurants, and Greek customs embedded themselves so thoroughly into the town's identity that Tarpon Springs became, and has remained, more Greek than most cities in Greece. The sponge docks on the Anclote River still operate. Divers still demonstrate traditional sponge harvesting for the tourist boats. The Greek restaurants on Dodecanese Boulevard still make their own phyllo. Around 25,000 people live in Tarpon Springs today, and the town draws visitors year-round who come specifically for an experience that has no equivalent anywhere else in the American South. The community has absorbed generations of change without losing the core of what Kokoris brought here from the Aegean. That kind of cultural persistence in Florida, where everything tends to get paved over eventually, is genuinely rare. 4. Micanopy. Micanopy is the oldest inland town in Florida, established in 1821 on land that the Seminole people had occupied for centuries before that. It has one main street. It has roughly 600 residents. It has more antique shops per capita than almost any community in the southeastern United States, which is either a coincidence or the result of the town's particular relationship with accumulated time. The live oaks that arch over Chokoloskee Boulevard are so large and so old that the street feels like a tunnel through something older than the town itself. The film Doc Hollywood was shot here in 1991, which brought a wave of visitors who came looking for a small-town Florida that had otherwise already vanished. What they found was genuine. The general store on the main street has been operating in various forms since the 1800s. The bed and breakfasts and the historic homes fill months in advance. Micanopy has never been in a hurry, and that quality turns out to be almost impossible to manufacture. Developers have circled the town for decades. The residents have defeated every proposal, which at this point has become its own form of local tradition. 3. White Springs. White Springs sits on the Suwannee River in Hamilton County, and its connection to that river is the reason it exists on any tourist's radar at all. Stephen Foster never actually visited the Suwannee River. He was in Pittsburgh when he wrote Old Folks at Home in 1851, picked the name from a map because it scanned correctly in the melody, and created one of the most performed songs in American history about a place he had never seen. Florida made the song its state anthem in 1935 and built the Stephen Foster Folk Culture Center State Park in White Springs on the banks of the river he invented. The irony is embedded in the visitor experience. A folk culture museum dedicated to a man who fabricated his connection to the place, located in a town that draws tourists specifically because of that fabrication. The Suwannee is beautiful. Foster's Memorial Carillon plays his songs on the hour. The whole arrangement is more honest about the construction of American nostalgia than it probably intended to be. White Springs also hosts the Florida Folk Festival every Memorial Day weekend, drawing thousands of musicians and listeners to a town that otherwise operates at a pace closer to the 1890s than the present. 2. Yankeetown. Yankeetown in Levy County has roughly 400 residents, a name that has confused Floridians for over a century, and an atmosphere so thoroughly frozen in the 1950s that film crews use it as a location set without any modification required. The name came from a developer named A.F. Knotts, who arrived from Indiana in 1923, and whose northern origin prompted the locals to call the settlement Yankeetown, with the particular edge that name carried in the post-Reconstruction South. Knotts kept the name anyway. The town grew around fishing on the Withlacoochee River, attracted celebrities including Herbert Hoover and Gary Cooper to its fishing lodge in the mid-20th century, and then simply declined to update itself when Florida modernized around it. The Isaac Walton Lodge where Hoover fished is still standing and still operating. The river guides know every bend. The visitors who find Yankeetown are mostly fishing tourists and location scouts, and both groups tend to come back. There is no cell service in significant portions of the town, which the permanent residents consider a feature rather than a problem, and which the location scouts consider ideal. 1. Chokoloskee. Chokoloskee is a 150-acre island in Collier County that sits 10 feet above sea level on a shell mound built by the Calusa people over a period of roughly 2,000 years. The Calusa were not farmers. They built their civilization entirely on fishing and aquaculture, and they moved enough shells, conch, whelk, oyster to raise a permanent island from a Florida bay with no tools beyond their hands and their time. The island they built is still inhabited. Around 400 people live there today. The shell mound beneath their streets and houses is a 2,000-year-old engineering project that most residents walk across without thinking about it. Edgar Watson, the most notorious figure in Everglades history, a suspected serial killer who was shot by a mob of his neighbors in 1910, lived and died on Chokoloskee. Peter Matthiessen wrote a trilogy of novels about him. The island draws historians, paddlers entering the Everglades Wilderness Waterway, and people who want to stand on something ancient and feel the weight of it. There are not many places in Florida where you can do that. Chokoloskee is one of them. The Calusa are gone, displaced, and ultimately destroyed by European contact in the 18th century, but the island they spent 2 millennia building is still here, still inhabited, still holding people above the water. Florida's tourist economy runs on manufactured, experience-controlled environments, branded attractions, curated fun. What makes these 10 towns different is that none of them were designed for the visitors they receive. Seaside was the exception, and even Seaside became something its designer didn't fully anticipate. The rest simply existed, stubbornly and specifically, until the people who were exhausted by Florida's theme park version of itself started looking for the other one. They found it in oyster bars and shell mounds, in spiritualist camps and sponge docks, in rivers named by a man who never saw them. The real Florida has always been stranger and more interesting than the advertised one. It just requires knowing where to look.